Welcome. In this tutorial, I'll teach you how to knit this classic crew neck sweater using this pattern I have over here. I'll leave a link in the description for you guys. I'm using my black and gold yarn, and first step is to set up my machine to knit the ribbed hem. I like to do a folded ribbed hem because it's stretchy and I think it lasts longer than when it's just a single layer ribbed hem. So I push all my needles out in a 1 by 1 needle arrangement on both my main bed and on my ribber, and I knit across those needles to align them to be positioned and then put my yarn into the connecting arm. Next, I'm going to knit one row across my bed, making sure all my carriages are set to plain knit. My tension is set to the right tension and my bed is on pitch, so that means my needles are arranged in an alternate fashion. One needle on the main bed, next needle on the ribber. Now that I've knit the first row, I'm going to put my comb in to secure those stitches and put my wire through and put my weights on my comb. Then I'm going to set my row counter to 0 and I'm going to knit 44 rows. Once that's done, I'm ready to transfer my ribber stitches to the main bed needles. I finished transferring all my needles, all my stitches to the main bed. I'm going to lower my ribber and I'm going to take my weight off because I find that if I don't, it falls on my toes and that's really painful. So I'm taking my weight off for the next step. I'm going to also take my ribber off so that you guys can see what I'm about to do here. Next, I'm going to take the comb off, take the wire out. And here's a pro tip. I put my wire back into my comb immediately I take it off. That way my wire doesn't get bent out of shape and hard to feed through the comb. Can set that aside, and then I'm going to pick up the edge of my ribbed fabric. I like picking up in sections, so I pick up the ends first, then I pick up the center, and then I pick up the sections in between onto the main bed needles. Once that's done, once I have all my edge picked up onto the main bed, I'm going to push all the needles forward to hold in position. And then I'm going to take my extension rail, put that in my bed because my stitches are really close to the end of my bed. And I want room for my carriage to sit. Put my carriage on and I'm going to put my yarn in. Before that, let me put my comb on. And put some weights on this comb as well. Then I'm going to feed my yarn into my carriage and I'm going to knit one row across these stitches to close the edges of my ribbed band. Then reset my row counter to 0 because I'm ready to start knitting the body of my sweater. I want to set up my pattern, and first step is to turn on your machine and then choose your pattern number. I initially set this machine up to knit pattern 38. That was a mistake, as you'll see shortly. Set your carriage to select the needles and knit one row across. All my needles are now selected for pattern knitting. Then I'm going to set my carriage to Fair Isle, pushing the Fair Isle button, put my second color in, and then begin to knit. From this point on, there's really no shaping. You're just knitting back and forth to your desired row, your desired length. After knitting a few rows and seeing the pattern start to take shape, I realized that the pattern was different from the swatch that I had knit. Here's my swatch. And I had accidentally put in pattern number 38 instead of 28. So I'm changing it to 28 at this point before I continue. So even if you make a mistake with your pattern and if you catch it early, you can still save your work. That's a lesson to learn from this. And then I knit in my chosen pattern until I had knit about 165 rows. You can see the pattern start to take shape here. And at this point, you can really see how beautiful the pattern is that we're knitting. Okay, so now I'm at the stage where I should be shaping the armhole. I'm at row 164. I'm going to set my row counter back to 0. I like to break my work into sections and then keep track of how many rows I've knit in those sections. I find that it makes it easier. According to my armhole shaping instructions, I'm going to bind off 5 stitches at each edge. I've done 5 here. Knit 1 row across my work, bind off 5 stitches on the opposite edge, knit 1 row back, and that completes reduce 5 stitches and knit 2 rows. And if you go back to the instruction, the next step would be to bind off 4 stitches and knit 2 rows, and after that 3 stitches and knit 2 rows. So it's like a gradual step reduction. That's how you achieve the shape of the armhole. So I'm going to bind off 4, knit 1 row back, bind off 4 stitches on the other side, and knit 1 row back, and then 3 stitches, and then 2 stitches. When I finish binding off 2 stitches and knit 2 rows, I'm at row 8. Okay, I'm at row 8, and then the next stage is to reduce 1 stitch at each edge and knit 2 rows. And I'm going to do this until I have only 128 stitches left, because that's the width of my sweater at the shoulder after I've bound off the armhole stitches. So I'm using my transfer tool and transferring 1 stitch over and knitting 2 rows until I have only 128 stitches left. So that's 64 stitches on the right and left of my machine. Here's how my curve looks. And now I'm just going to continue until I've knit 65 rows. From the point where I begin armhole shaping to the point where I begin neckline shaping is 65 rows. At row 65, I'm ready to begin shaping the neckline. And the first step is to push all the needles I won't be working on, half of my work, to hold from 0 to the right I'm pushing all those needles to hold because my carriage is on the left. I'm going to knit that side first. On my patterning display, I'm pushing the memo button. That way, my machine remembers to come back to this pattern row when I go to knit the right side. On my carriage, I'm setting my holding cam to hold, and to reduce 5 stitches at that edge, I'm going to push 5 stitches from the left side forward to hold. Okay, this is called partial knitting. I'm shaping the neckline using partial knitting. So 5 stitches forward and then knit 1 row. And then I'm supposed to push 4 stitches forward at this point, but if I failed to do that, so for the next step, I actually pushed forward 7 stitches, 4 plus 3, and then knit 1 row back, and then 2 stitches. And what I'm doing here is removing the yarn and putting it under and over those needles so that I don't have a long loop over the needles I'm pushing to hold. Then 1 stitch forward. I lost my stitch. So if you lose your stitch when you're doing partial knitting, that's because you don't have enough weight on those stitches. And what you need to do is pick them up like I'm showing here. Pick up the stitches you've dropped. If you need to knit a row that has dropped, do that. I dropped 1 row, so I'm manually knitting that row, and then I'm going to take my weight and put some weight on those stitches beside the needles that I've pushed to hold. That's going to help me not drop stitches anymore. This is very important when you are shaping with partial knitting or doing partial knitting in general. And I'm going to keep on shifting my weight as I push more needles forward to E position. And I even pull down on the weight a little because that helps to make sure that that needle doesn't drop its stitch. And I'm going to keep on pushing 1 needle forward to hold until I've put all my neckline stitches to hold. The width of my neckline is 48. That's 24 stitches on each side. And at this point, I have the 24 stitches all out to hold in position. So I'm just going to continue knitting until I've gotten to the point where I'm shaping my shoulder. Okay. If you calculate how many rows it would take for my neckline shaping, it's about 14 rows. And if you add that to the 65 rows I knit earlier, that's about 79 rows. I need an extra row, so that's 80 rows I have on my row counter. I want to reset my row counter to 15, because for my neckline shaping section, I've actually knit 14 plus 1, 15. That helps me keep track of where I am with the knitting. And then I'm just going to continue and knit until I'm at row 44 for my shoulder shaping. I'm at row 44, and for the shoulder shaping, I'm just going to reduce 8 stitches at each edge and knit 2 rows 5 times. There's a small caveat. So when I created this pattern, I used my pattern generator app, which is still a work in progress. And it instructs me to bind off 8 stitches and knit 2 rows. But at the end, you will see that following that method leaves me with no stitches for the last 3 rows. So for the back, I'm going to demonstrate this. Instead of binding off and then knitting 2 rows, it should actually be knit 2 rows first and then bind off 8 stitches. That way, for the last 3 rows, I still have stitches left to knit before I bind off the last section of stitches. Don't know if that makes sense. Anyway, if you guys want to know more about creating your own patterns, how to do the maths and calculate your patterns, I have a course in my online knitting school I'll leave a link to it in the description and you can go check it out if you like. So this is me binding off my 8 stitches. And then knitting 2 rows. So this is a point I mentioned earlier. So right now I have 8 stitches left, and if I bound off all 8 stitches, I would have no stitches left to knit my final 3 rows. So at this point I improvised and I bound off only 4 of those stitches and then knit 2 rows. I knit my final 2 rows. I don't need my second color anymore, so I cut that off and knit my 2 rows. I dropped those stitches, so I picked them back up and manually knit my 2 rows. And then bound off my stitches. And this section of neckline and shoulder shaping is done. Here's how it looks. And now we're going to move over to the right side. Now for the right side of my knitting, I am first going to turn my row counter to 0. And then I'm going to take all my needles from the 5th needle on the right side to the end back to B position. I leave the first 5 needles because according to my neckline shaping instructions, I'm going to reduce that. I'm going to push it forward to hold in position anyway. So I leave that alone and take the 6th needle to the last one on the right back to B position. And then I want that pattern to start where the left side started. So I'm going to come back to my patterning device and push in my memo key. And you can see it's gone back to row 5 of the pattern. And to select the needles for the pattern, I'm going to push my carriage beyond the turn mark, set it to select the belt and push in both skip stitch buttons. My holding cam is still set to hold and there's no yarn in my carriage. What the skip stitch button does is it prevents the needles at B from dropping off with no yarn in my carriage. My needles are now selected for the pattern and I can put my yarn in and push in my Fair Isle button. And now I'm ready to knit and shape the neckline on the right side. So just as with the left, I'm shaping the curve by decreasing incrementally. No, so decreasing in steps of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 stitches. I remember that because it's a partial knit decrease, you need weight. You need some weight on the needles beside the ones that hold in position so you don't drop those stitches. once I've got all my neckline stitches decreased, I'm just going to knit straight to row 44. That's the point out to which I begin shaping the shoulder. At this point here, my carrier jammed and I had to take it off and fix my stitches. If you guys would like to see a slow down video of what to do when your carrier jams, let me know in the comments and I'll post a video showing what happened there. At the shoulder shaping point, just as with the left side, I'm binding off 8 stitches and then knitting 2 rows. And that's the end of the neckline and shoulder shaping. The next step is to pick up the neckline edge onto the bed. I'm going to take my 1-prong transfer tool and pick up the shoulder edge of the neckline onto a needle. I'm leaving a slight sag between the needles on hold and that needle that I picked up. And you need to make sure that the distance, the number of needles you pick up to the left and to the right of your on-hole needles is the same. So on the right, I picked that stitch up on needle number 50. So on the left, I also picked up the shoulder edge onto needle number 50. And the beauty of this method for the round neck is at this point, you know how many stitches you're going to need for your front neckband. I need 100 needles, 100 stitches when I go to knit the neckband for the front neckline. Okay, then I'm also picking up the edge from that shoulder point I picked up until the rest of my neckline stitches that are out to hold. I'm going to do that for the right side and I'm also going to do that for the left side. And especially when I go to pick up the one close to the needles on hold, I want to make sure there's no hole in my neckline. So I pick up really close to the stitch that I have out to hold to ensure that there's no gap and there's no hole when I finish my neckline. So that's the right side done. I'm going to do the same thing for the left side. Now I'm going to set my holding cam to not hold anymore, put my waste yarn in and just knit 6 rows over these needles that I've picked up. So this holds my neckline ready for when I've knit my neckband and I come to join it to the body. I'm done with waist knitting and cut my yarn, take off my comb and then knit this work off the machine so that we can take a look at this beautiful sweater panel that we have knit. I'm just going to pin it on the gate pegs here so that you guys can take a look at it. The final step that I do to ensure that it's easy for me to seam is to steam. So I steam my work, my panels with my steamer, paying particular attention to the curling edges because I want those to lay flat. When they lay flat, it's easier to sew. So I hover the steamer on those edges and then use my hand to gently mold it flat. It's really easy to distort your work if you're not careful with the steamer. So you have to be gentle with the steaming, especially if you're using acrylic yarn as I am. Once I'm done steaming, I let it lay there and dry out before I fold it up and set it aside for when I go to join all my panels together. Here's how a sweater looks. It's a beauty, if I must do say so myself. If you watched this far, thank you for watching. In the next video, I'm going to show how to knit the back. The back is really similar to the front. The only difference is the depth of the back neckline. Here's my little detail that I accidentally added. So make sure that you come back next week and watch the video for the back. If you have any questions, don't forget to leave a comment. Make sure you share and save and subscribe. Till the next video.